Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Capturing Christianity. My name is Cameron Bertuzzi. I'm here with Trent Doherty, Than Christopoulos, and Caleb Jackson. And tonight we are demonstrating that Christianity is highly, highly probable. And we're going to be using some really nifty software, that I've developed with the help of AI to show this. This is basically like a visual representation of how probabilistic reasoning works, and specifically Bayesian reasoning. And it's really cool. And Caleb, from what I understand, like you're still kind of new to Bayes, so this is actually going to serve as a kind of like introduction, or like you can let me know if like you're not following along what's happening as I go through this explanation and explain like what's happening. And you can let me know if you're not following, and that'll actually help the audience too. The reason why I've invited these specific individuals, we've got, again, Trent up here. He's a professional philosopher and analytic philosopher, really cool guy. Then we've got Than, who's, that's Than. From Inspiring Philosophy. And then we've got Caleb Jackson. Caleb Jackson is the reason why I've invited him is because he's an expert on miracles, and that will be sort of the bulk of what we're talking about tonight. So obviously the most important miracle in Christianity is the resurrection. So we're going to start there, then we're going to fan out and start looking at other miracles, more modern miracles, and we're going to see how they impact the probability that Christianity is true. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Do you guys have any thoughts before we begin, before we start inputting numbers and messing around with the software?
Well, you might want to say at least something about the initial split of 50-50, because I know some people are going to not like that from both directions. Some people are going to maybe misunderstand why you're starting at 50-50. And so it might be worth just spending a couple of minutes on why start at 50-50.
Okay. Than, what were you going to say?
Yeah, all I was going to say, I was going to make a joke. And before we go into anything serious, which is Caleb and I have been, you and I have been friends for a really long time. How is this your first an introduction to Bayes? Like literally every conversation we have, it turns into this somehow.
It's not. I will clarify for the uninitiated. It's not that I don't understand Bayesian reasoning. I just am not good at math. I understand the principles of it. I just get bored every time Dan tries to explain the number.
Yeah. So what's cool about this software is that it displays everything like really, makes it look really nice. So let's begin. We'll start with, I should also mention that if you guys want to follow along with this, I've actually uploaded this app to our Patreon. So anyone, like you just pay $5 a month and you can gain access to download the app and play around with it and add your own evidence. And you can use this. Bayesian reasoning doesn't just, specifically have anything to do with religion. You can use it for anything you want to reason through. And so our purposes tonight obviously are about Christianity. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start by just outlining the two different hypotheses under consideration. So this software actually allows you to go up to 4 hypotheses if you wanted to, which is pretty cool, just to show you how super dynamic this software is. So what we're going to do, the first hypothesis is obviously Christianity. Okay, and we're going to compare that to basically the negation of Christianity. Those are our 2 hypotheses under consideration. And so abbreviation C for Christianity, abbreviation not C for the negation of Christianity. And let's talk about the priors. So initially I had this was mainly heuristic. So I just wanted to show the software, like what it can do. I was not planning on actually starting at a 50-50 split between the 2 hypotheses. I was actually going to be very generous to the non-Christians, to anyone who doesn't hold Christianity or thinks that Christianity is super implausible, super unlikely. I was actually going to start with a 0.01, so basically a 1% chance that Christianity is true. I was going to start there and then move up and still show, like, even if we start with a really low prior for Christianity, the evidence, once you start stacking it up, can just overwhelm that low prior. So, yeah. Trent, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, you might just put in the notes the phrase washing out of the priors. There is a studied phenomenon called the washing out of the priors that show that almost arbitrarily low priors can be overcome by enough lines of converging evidence.
Right.
There's
right.
good stuff written on that would be worth taking a look at.
Well, and that's what we're going to see tonight, is that even if you give a low prior probability for Christianity being true, then it's not really going to matter a whole lot once you start looking at the evidence for Christianity. And once you start to plug it in with the software and stuff, it makes it very, visually interesting and visually like apparent that Christianity just has to be super likely based on the evidence. Let's do this though. Before we get to starting to apply numbers and getting into the nitty gritty details, let's talk about in Bayesian reasoning. And Trent, I'm going to pass it over to you for this. What is the difference between, let's say, the prior probability and like a likelihood ratio? Because those are the two like main factors that we need to know, the two main things that we need to know about Bayesian reasoning. So just give a quick explanation of what those two things are, and then we'll begin putting in numbers and having some fun.
Sure. I'm still excited to talk about priors in general and what it means to start at 50-50 and why you might want to start there and who might want to start there and who might want to start elsewhere. But so the prior probability is actually kind of a tougher term than is often admitted, because there's prior to what? So there's like what you might call prime prior probability, which is it's the probability of a proposition only on, pure logical information, on tautologies, sometimes people say, or the probability of a proposition just in virtue of its cognitive content. So there's MML approaches, information theoretic approaches like minimum message length, where you can take a proposition and basically, for all practical purposes, it's like you take a proposition and you compress it using some form of compression software to make it, the shortest possible way of expressing that, to reduce the quantity of content to the smallest possible amount of information. And then the prior probability of a proposition is in direct proportion to its simplicity, or in inverse proportion to its information content. One way to sort of intuitively grasp that is just to realize that the probability of a conjunction is always less than the probability of the individual conjuncts when they are non-logically equivalent. And so it's just the more you say, obviously, the less likely a proposition is going to be. The more you venture, the more bold a proposition, the less intrinsically likely it's going to be. And if you sort of reverse that, it's kind of like taking the Big Bang and then moving backwards through time to some sort of singularity. It's the same thing with probability. It makes perfect common sense that the more information there is in a statement, the bolder the statement is, the less likely it is to be true. And say, okay, well, let's just reel it in backwards and just compress propositions to their smallest possible amount of information. Well, that's going to be your highest prior probability, because it's going to be an objective measure or semi-objective measure that you're making the least bold or most humble comment possible. But then there's prior probabilities, meaning prior to our adducing some sort of new set of evidence. So it's the probability of a proposition based on, let's say, publicly available information or widely accepted information. It's always a dynamic thing relative to a conversation.
So you're kind of getting into like how we set the priors, but what I wanted to get at first was just the distinction between like a prior probability versus a likelihood ratio or like a Bayes factor or something along those lines. Well, just to get an audience like an idea of like sure. what even is the prior, like when we say prior probability, like what does that even mean?
Well, prior to investigating a particular body of evidence. And so when you bring in a particular set of items of evidence, then the likelihood is the probability that observation would occur if the hypothesis were in fact true. And then the nice thing about a Bayes factor is just a ratio between how likely each hypothesis makes that observation, that evidence. And the nice thing about that is it doesn't. I mean, in one way, it's a plus and a minus. It's a plus that it obviates the discussion of prior probabilities. Now, obviously, you could say, well, it just neglects prior probabilities, but because of things like the washing out of the priors, if you have a high enough ratio of likelihood power in favor of one hypothesis, then at least it tells you that unless you can argue that there's at least as strong an asymmetry in the priors, then this hypothesis is going to be the clear winner. And usually it's a lot easier to argue for likelihood ratios than it is for prior probabilities. And so even though Bayes factors, which is nothing but a likelihood ratio, the ratio between the probability of this evidence being the case on one hypothesis versus another, it gets you some really strong indications of truth without having to fully settle the issue of priors.
Yeah. Well, now that we've got like a sort of basic understanding of what the differences between priors and, say, the likelihood ratio or Bayes factor, continue what you were saying about the setting the numbers for the priors. How we do that?
Yeah.
How we go about that? The two different methods.
Right.
Yeah.
Just
So
really quick too. It might be a good idea, because I can hear the skeptics in my head already. It might be good also for us to cover the difference between statistical probability and epistemic probability and that whole topic as well.
Maybe so. I don't want to spend too much time on this before we get into like actually discussing miracles and stuff, without losing the audience, because I know the audience is like itching to start to see things move and stuff. So maybe we can maybe talk about that a little bit later on.
Okay.
But let's continue. Maybe while we're discussing this trend, we'll go ahead and pull up the app, and then we can start to mess around with stuff as you're talking.
Yeah, so I think that for now, the best way to address Than's very reasonable concern is to just say that, look, we can be pluralists about what probability is. There's a type of probability that's based just on frequencies, like the probability that, somebody's going to get a hit and get on base based on their stats. If somebody's batting 325 and against right-handers, then we can say something about, we can use that as to project a probability onto that they're going to get on base on the next pitcher. And there's like propensity probabilities, like what's the probability that this particle will decay in the next 5 years. And then there's probabilities that are just based on psychological expectations, where you're like, what is the probability that this person will buy you a present in the next year based on your grasp of their personality and sort of thing. You can be a pluralist about probabilities and say that I can assign an expected value to an outcome based on all kinds of things, based on all kinds of frequencies or statistics or whatever. We do not have to settle the issue of, quote, what is a probability or how are probabilities grounded. We can at least start out as good pluralists and just say, yeah, there's a lot of ways probabilities are grounded. Yeah. And we just, it's on a case by case basis.
Great.
Fair enough. All right, Trent, let me ask you this now. What should we set the priors at for these two hypotheses? And keep in mind that they've got to equal a total of 1. So like if we set the prior for Christianity at like 0.4, then we've got to set the prior for the negation of Christianity at 0.6.
Yeah, so the very first axiom in axiomatic probability theory is that the measure of the outcome space is 1, which means that for any two, contradictory hypotheses, H1 and H2, if it's in this case like C and not C, then the probability of not C is just 1 minus the probability of C. So there's no assigning it like, well, Christianity would be 0.3 and not Christianity would be 0.6. There'd be 10% in the logical gap between C and not C, which is nothing. So it is an absolute law of probability. Now there's other ways of doing it, very non-standard probabilities, but in normal axiomatic probability theory, the probability of not H is 1 minus the probability of H. So if you set either one of them, you determine the other one. So in this way, since it's not Christianity versus naturalism or Christianity versus the hypothesis of indifference or anything like that, not C includes non-Messianic Judaism, Islam, uh, uh, you know, Tibetan Buddhism, other forms of Buddhism, Sikhism.
Naturalism.
Yeah. And the really crazy thing is it involves 2 godism, 3 godism, 4 godism, 5 godism, 6 godism, and all that. Now, those views are, I would argue they have priors that are, approximately 0. But at least if you thought, oh, well, he's doing 50-50 because, it's like it could be true or it could be not true, right? We're just trying to be fair. That actually wouldn't be very good in a case like this where not C includes all these other religions. Because then if you go, just suppose you go Christianity, non-Messianic, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and then maybe an other, well, then it would be 16.7% for Christianity if you were sort of just trying to be programmatically fair and distribute probabilities evenly across major religions. So I wouldn't think you'd want to set it any higher than 16.7%.
For the probability of Christianity?
Yeah. To start out,
okay. Okay. Let's do 15.5.15. We'll start there. And 0.85 for the negation of Christianity. So obviously what's happening in the software is now we have the prior set at 15% for Christianity and 85% for the negation of Christianity. So we're heavily already leaning toward Christianity being false. Okay. That's what this means so far.
85% is enough for somebody to be like, I'm not sure Christianity is false, but I'm strongly inclined to believe that
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Right. I'm not certain, but I'm pretty sure Christianity is false. And that's a lot of people. It's not going to, in academia, there's lots of, wackos that are like, I think the prior of theism is, 1 in 10 to the negative 23rd, like that kind of stuff, like Planck's constant. But
I should have asked you guys. We've got this really neat feature where you can make it light. Do you guys prefer the white or the dark?
Dark.
Dark looks better. Yeah.
Yeah. I've already got a light
dark
in my
mode.
face.
All right. We'll keep it dark mode, but if you guys download the app and go to our Patreon, you can put it in light mode if you want. So that's where we'll start the priors, and then we'll just see what happens once we start adding some evidence. And we're going to be very, very conservative with the numbers. Okay, that's what I want to do, because I want this to be a sort of learning stream where we learn how the evidence can impact those numbers, even if we're very conservative in what we assign to those numbers. Now, I think Trent is going to give some pushback on like where those numbers, like a more realistic number for the different pieces of evidence. And we'll maybe talk about that and kind of make some adjustments, and we'll see what it does to the graph. And it's really cool how the software works. But let's begin by adding our first bit of evidence, which is the resurrection. So the resurrection evidence, one thing we should note is that we're not assuming that it was like actually miraculous. Okay, what we're doing is we are we're going to discuss the different facts surrounding the case of the resurrection or around some other miracle event. And then we're going to say what hypothesis better predicts those facts. So we're not saying the fact is that a miracle occurred. We're saying, okay, in the case of the resurrection, we've got these eyewitness reports, we've got an empty tomb, we've got appearances. What best explains that about, the resurrection? So that's what we're going to be doing throughout tonight. We're not going to assume that these are genuine miracles, because if we did that, it would basically be kind of like stacking the deck in our favor, and it would just lower the probability of the negation of Christianity to basically like 0, and it wouldn't be very interesting tonight. So we're not going to assume that these are actual genuine miracles. We're just going to be talking about the facts surrounding them. So now we have the resurrection on the table. This is where Than gets to shine. Let's talk about some of the facts about the resurrection that need to be explained before we start assigning any numbers here.
Yeah, I mean, this all depends on where you land as it regards to, gospel reliability and all that stuff. So on one end of the spectrum, you can take more of like a minimal facts type approach and just kind of go based off of what the majority of like critical scholars are going to agree. And on the other end of the spectrum, you can kind of be like me, where I think the gospels are reliable, and I think we have access to what the original alleged eyewitnesses said and testified to with regards to the resurrected Christ. So if you're on my end of the spectrum, the resurrection evidence is going to be something like you have about 21 unique eyewitness testimonies that are multi-sensory in nature. They're expecting a hostile environment. They endured voluntary suffering. There's embarrassing testimony included. This is across 40 days, across many different instances. I mean, I can keep on going if you want, but you kind of get the point here. So, I mean, it's up to you guys how you want to do this. This is one of the cool things about Bayes' theorem is you can run the numbers multiple times in a bunch of different ways, and just kind of meet people where they're at.
Do you think it'd be better to do the minimalist approach just to be charitable? We'll grant just the minimal facts, sort of Habermas style, just because people are going to contest, I'm sure, with like the Gospels.
Yeah.
Approach. It's going to be less.
Yeah, and Trent is a huge fan of the minimal facts approach. So,
well, I'm a huge fan of knowing at least key facts. I think, as a arch Bayesian, when you're considering the probability of a proposition, the only body of evidence that matters in the end is total evidence. But I actually took a class on the resurrection with Gary Habermas way back in the olden days. I won't even say the year. I won't even like what was the Biden quote? I say the number in my head and I can't believe it. It was a long freaking time ago. It was 1990. I took a class with Gary Habermas on the resurrection. I was Norm Geisler, rest in peace. Norm Geisler's research assistant at the Liberty Center for Research and Scholarship. And, Hab is a force of nature. He's awesome. And neither Hab nor me, nor anybody with any sanity whatsoever thinks that the probability of the resurrection should be judged based on anything less than total evidence. But as a heuristic, as a handy organizing way of making a presentation, it's very powerful. And a very powerful case for the resurrection can be made from a minimal facts standpoint, where minimal facts can be defined in a number of reasonable ways. But I like Caleb's point, like, just to be charitable, let's just start with some small key number.
Yeah, so the facts on the table are the empty tomb, well, I guess the burial as well, the burial, the empty tomb, the appearances after the resurrection. And, Craig likes to talk about the origin of belief for the disciples and how that was like sort of unexpected. I think that has more to do with the priors, but those are sort of the general core facts, and we're not going to get into all of the details. Otherwise, we're going to be here all night just talking about the resurrection. So we want to talk about multiple independent miracles. And so if you guys want to learn more about that, we've done plenty of shows on that. Inspiring Philosophy has done plenty of shows on the resurrection. You can go look more into that if you want. But those are the sort of general facts on the table. And then the question is, well, how well do these alternative hypotheses explain the data? Explain the fact that the tomb was empty. Explain the fact that groups of people had experiences of Jesus after the fact. And so that's where we're going to turn to now. That's what these two figures are here. So P parenthesis, open parentheses, E over C, or E given C. What that means is, what is the probability of the evidence given C, given Christianity, our first hypothesis. So this is the first number we need to deal with. And right now it's set at a 50% chance that the evidence obtains given Christianity, which basically says if Christianity is true, how likely is that evidence going to be for us? And so I think a very conservative number to put here is actually to keep it at 50%. What do you guys think?
How can it not be one?
The evidence for Christianity? Well, it depends on what we mean by Christianity. And so I should have said that earlier. Yeah, I should have said that earlier. So what we mean by Christianity, I'm going to define it as Nicene Christianity. So this is not going to be a stream where we're like arguing for some particular tradition or anything like that. We're going to say, okay, look at the Nicene Creed. If you hold all of those facts, then that's sort of what Christianity is. And then the question is, so like if we go from Nicene Christianity and we say, okay, well, what would that predict? That would predict there would be some sort of reports, but I don't think, Trent, to your point, I don't think it would be one. It'd be like, and again, I want this to be I want it to be a sort of pedagogical stream. I want it to like show people that even if we assign lower numbers than we might want to, or might be reasonable, then it still is just super, super probable that Christianity is true.
And it depends on how you're doing it as a whole, right? Because you could say the appearance of the disciples might not be that unlikely, given that people sometimes bereave and have visions, right? Paul's conversion seems pretty unlikely, but then there would be people who say, well, Jesus could have appeared to the Sanhedrin or to Pilate or to the Aztecs, right? And so like if that had happened, it'd be closer to 90. Like, so I don't know, do we predict under Christianity that Jesus appears to everyone? Do we predict that he only appears to certain people? Do we predict that he appears to people and converts them like Paul? Like you kind of have to define all that, right?
Yeah. So Trent, going back to you.
Yeah, so I'm going to be a little bit obstinate here for a minute. You say Nicene Christianity, but the resurrection's a literal tenet of the Nicene Creed.
Right. Well, this is not I don't want to get too deep into the weeds with you on this, Trent. I just want to.
Well, no. But this is important because you want to make sure that you are working with a definition that is a reasonable definition, but like since the resurrection is how is the resurrection not a tenet of Christianity?
What if we just said Christianity entails like classical theism, the God with the omniproperties existing, and him becoming incarnate person of Jesus, and dying on the cross or whatever, and the resurrection fits within that narrative, right? But I feel like that's broad enough to where we could say that the resurrection is an entailment of that, or at least a prediction of that, but it doesn't mean that that's working in it.
So Trent, keep in mind when I have the resurrection like written here, but what we actually mean is a set of data, right? The set of data of these reports. There's a report of a burial, report of an empty tomb, report of the appearances, and so that's the type of evidence that's under consideration when we're evaluating the hypotheses.
And a resurrection logically entails an empty tomb,
right?
So the probability of empty tomb given a resurrection is literally 1.
Well, it's these specific reports.
Right.
It's that we have this specific report from, say, Mark.
Right. What Cam's trying to say is like, suppose Jesus rose from the dead, there's a possible world where instead of Mary discovering the tomb and then going on and testifying, it could have been Peter discovering the empty tomb. Or some other dude, maybe it's Pontius Pilate who discovered it, right?
Well, but we don't normally evaluate scientific hypotheses that way. We say things like, if this theory is right, then we should discern other exoplanets within X radius of the Milky Way. We don't say, what's the probability that it would be in this location or at this radius? We say a certain number of exoplanets should be able to be observed within this radius. And so you go look within that radius and you find, here's one. Yep, we found 5 or 500 or 5,000 or whatever. That's not how we do it in science. We don't look for things that predict that level of particularity.
The problem though is if we put a 1 in here, then it just like the whole night is done, right? We're done for the whole evening. So that's not that we can't do that. So we got to come up with something else. So do you have another suggestion of how we should?
You can entail a skeptical sort of like what Dale Allison does. Like we could say, okay, maybe the body's moved. Maybe there's like a mass hysteria. Maybe Paul has a guilt complex, right? Like I don't think that we can say what's the probability of that versus the probability of these reports given the resurrection.
You could say, you could make the data be reports of an empty tomb.
Right.
Then it's not logically entailed. But I'm not trying to be pedantic. I'm just trying to be precise.
Right. So so just to back up a little bit. So what you're doing is we need to get precise about the hypothesis under consideration. When we say Christianity, what do we mean? And then we need to get precise about the data. And so Trent, maybe to help us get set up for the evening, how would you recommend that we set up these hypotheses and set up at least the data for the resurrection? Because when it comes to the other miracles, we're not going to run into the same problem. There is no, miracle of Calanda, say, in the Nicene Creed. So what would you suggest, Trent?
That we use the phrase claims, that the datum is multiple claims of an empty tomb. That way we're not even assuming the tomb is empty. We're just saying Matthew records this, Mark records this, Luke records this, and then we can talk about the degree of independence or lack of independence between those three reports. Those sorts of things, I think, they do not entail that the tomb was empty. And so
all right. So assuming those, that's what we're now assuming as our data. Now, going back to the original question, what probability would be a reasonable probability to expect that data given Christianity being true? What number would you assign here? I've got it at 50%. What would you assign it at?
Well, so the negation of the hypothesis that people claim that the tomb is empty is that they do not do so. And so the probability of the claim is going to be 1 minus the probability of its negation. So I say, how surprising would it be if Jesus rose from the dead and didn't tell anybody or nobody noticed, right? Infinitesimal. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to say that it is 1 minus epsilon, where epsilon, as it does in physics, stands for an arbitrarily small and irrelevant number.
Okay, so you're saying the most reasonable number is like 0.9999999.
Well, something like that. And again, and it's not so much like the pedagogy doesn't have to be just the number. It can be like, oh yeah, that's right. The way that I calculate the probability of some event is sometimes by thinking about the probability of its negation. What would it mean for this report to not be the case? Okay, well, that would mean that, the resurrection happened, but literally nobody mentioned it. And that seems like way less than 1%. And can I say something just very, very briefly about the phenomenon of iterated nines in percentages? Because sometimes we don't realize how much bigger 99.99 is than 99. So 99% is as a fraction 99 hundredths, right? So the exception rate for something that is 99% occurrence is 1 in 100. That's the exception rate, is 1 in 100. But if it's 99.9% occurrence, then that's equivalent to 999 thousandths, which means that the exception rate is 1 in 1,000. So your exception rate between 99 and 99.9 is an order of magnitude more rare. And if you go to 99.99, that's equivalent to 9,999 ten thousandths, which means that your exception rate is 1 in 10,000, which is, so when you go from 99% to 99.99%, your exception rate goes from 1 in 100 to 1 in 10,000. So while I am saying it's very, very high, I do want to caution that you can't throw decimal points in there casually, because they make a huge difference. So maybe just call it 99.
Let's still be. I want this to be a sort of teaching stream. So I want to help the audience out here. So let's maybe just set it at 0.9. Okay, what that means is that there's a 90% chance that we'd see the evidence if Christianity is true. Now we need to turn to the second variable, which is how expected is this evidence if Christianity is false? And again, keep in mind that the negation of Christianity is going to actually be a combination of a number of things. And so we're going to be able to pull on a bunch of different resources here to explain these facts. So nevertheless, I think it's still going to be very improbable that there was an empty tomb, that there were these appearances of Jesus after the resurrection. And so what number do you guys think that we should set this at?
I'm thinking,
and be as charitable as possible.
I'm thinking around 10% to be generous, because there are, if we're playing devil's advocate, we know that there are rare occasions where people have cognitive dissonance, like Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses, whatever, where they form sort of a cult of a religion after the leader dies, and they're able to have a movement and have success after that, right? So it's not common, but it's not unheard of. So I think 10% being very, very generous on the other end, that some people might think they saw Jesus and the body was moved or whatever. That makes sense to me, but I don't know.
All right, Than, what about you? What about you, Than?
Yeah, this is where I'm gonna probably agree with Trent here, because the not resurrection space is not going to be tested by just one particular reconstruction or model that's skeptical, right? The not our space is going to be basically like the logical possibility space of all the ways that the world could have been in which Jesus did not rise from the dead. And in order to get like a full partition, aka also a full posterior, you're going to have to get a weighted average of the not our space, and that's going to include things like
the not
Jesus
C space,
did not rise from the dead. Yeah, sorry, the not C space, and that's going to include some theories that don't even begin to explain the resurrection data. So let's say you have one really strong model that's going to explain the resurrection data, but then you have 50 other models that don't. The Bayes factor is going to get tanked for the not C space by those other models that don't explain the data. Does what I'm trying to say there?
Right. So
sense?
even if, so what you're saying is that even if there are some hypotheses that sort of fit in the not C space, and those do explain the empty tomb and the appearances, the real question is, what sort of dominates that space? What hypotheses dominate that space in terms of their ability to explain the data? It's not, the question is not, is it possible to explain the data? The question is, what chunk of that hypothesis can explain the data? And I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense here. So let me turn back to the graph now. So basically what we're saying is when you make an update here, this is really cool how this shows this visually. So at 0.5, what's happening is that 0.5 of the possibility space, 50% of the possibility space is being taken away. Okay. What we mean by possibility space is actually like after you input your prior probability numbers. So like, again, we were at 15% for Christianity, 85% for the negation of Christianity. So it's heavily weighted towards the negation of Christianity. So in this yellow bar here, we want to say this is, imagine that this is the entire possibility space. This is everything that could explain the evidence, all the different theories that could explain the evidence. So like swoon theory, you've got the conspiracy theory, all of that is going to fit into this not C space. Okay. And so what you do after you say, so like if you say the probability of the evidence given the negation of Christianity is 0.5 or 50%, what that does is it removes half of your possibility space. So you're saying that in that entire space, half of it is being removed because that half essentially doesn't explain the evidence. And then what's left over is half of that data. 90% of the data on the Christian hypothesis is still there. 90% of the possibility space is still there. That's what this leftover bar shows. And then half of the space is left for not C. Okay.
Yes,
so what you're saying is that I think
it helps if you imagine the yellow orange bar just coming together with the blue one through that illuminated space. Like once that space is eliminated, they sort of they come together and merge. And then so that the third line is nothing but the second line with the gray parts deleted and the vivid parts coming together.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. And then this last line is when it's renormalized over the whole stretch. Okay. Over the whole 0 to 100. or 0 to 1. Sorry, not 0 to 100. So basically, these percentages are then renormalized, and what we have is what's left over, and that's Bayes' theorem. But now we need to get back to, so now that has sort of been explained, now we need to get back to setting a number here. And so the question is going to be for us, of the possibility space on which Christianity is false, what portion actually explains these facts? Okay, is it 10%, like what Caleb suggested? Like, is 10% of that possibility space, could that 10% explain the data? Is it more than that? Is it 20%? Is it 30%? Is it 50% explains that? And I think generously, like, I agree with Caleb that the really only a small portion of that possibility space, the negation of Christianity, is actually going to serve as an explanation for that evidence or predict that evidence. So I think this number has to be really low.
And we're saying that the orange bar is all of the viable, like, this is everything that's not the resurrection that explains the evidence, right? It's not one particular theory. This is any theory that
right. Any theory in the possibility space that explains the data. And that's what's going to be left over after we update on this one piece of evidence. Those are the hypotheses that are going to be left on the table in the not C space.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's fair.
And that's going to be important. That's going to be important as we move forward, as we start to look at more pieces of evidence as well.
And I say 10% too. I think that's generous, but I feel like most theories now, most skeptics really will just do some version of a hallucination theory. Like the swoon theory is hardly ever argued anymore. Like no one argues for like the twin, identical twins. So really, you only have a handful of ones that are really proposed nowadays anyway that are somewhat plausible that actually account for the data. So I think keeping it relatively low is fair because there's not like a huge range of options we have that are equally plausible.
So right, this is a case where you really got to be careful about the level of generality that you use to describe the hypothesis. This is really, really important in scientific reasoning. So I said earlier that science doesn't get super specific. It doesn't say what's the probability that this apple fell on this area here. It's like, what is the probability that something of this mass falls, in these conditions? Well, by the same token, like suppose you say, okay, well, here's a hypothesis. What is the probability, or way of thinking about it? What's the probability that at some point in history, there's a movement where somebody claims that their leader rose from the dead? Well, that's going to be surely very high, much higher than 10%. So I'm not thinking we're going to solve this tonight, but it really does show that part of the work for defenders of the historical resurrection is to be better describers of the data and the hypotheses, and to really pay attention to this issue of the level of generality. Because if we're going to use these sorts of formal methods in philosophy of religion, we have to use them to the highest standards, the standards that the best scientific reasoners use, the standards that the best historiographic people use, the highest, the standards that the best psychologists use. So you've got to do a full treatment. You've really got to think about what the alternative hypothesis is. Now, in this case, the hypothesis that sometime in history, some major religious leader is reported to have vacated his tomb seems really too broad. So you got to look at, maybe look at Jesus. What is the probability that, given Jesus' teachings, that his disciples would, report that that the tomb was empty if it wasn't? That sort of thing. And that's really low. That's really low. But it's only low because you've described it at the right level of generality.
Specificity.
Yeah. Well, could we just keep it to where we describe it sort of the middle facts to say the probability that there would be credible testimony of a missing body, credible testimony of group appearances, and credible testimony of at least one hostile conversion? say Paul, right? But you could have combinations. Well, maybe it would have been this disciple instead of this disciple or whatever. Like, we don't have to get that specific, but just the probability you'd have conversions, people who see Jesus who were enemies, groups of people seeing Jesus after he died, and credible testimonies of the body going missing. Like, that to me seems like the most broad way you could say it without being so broad as to be over inclusive.
Yeah, but it does show how the case might be, the conjunction might be more important than just the sentence. The disciples reported the tomb empty. You got to unpack that. Which disciples? I guess you'd say any of them. We only know that a few of them did, right? So you say, okay, well, here are the disciples who made the reports, or here are the people who made the reports. What is the probability that, let's say, Luke would have recorded that so-and-so said that, right? So maybe that's the right level of generality, is to describe the evidence in terms of the gospel narrative itself.
So assuming we do that, let's because I want to move on to discussing other miracles. We've already been we're nearly an hour into the stream already. Trent, what is a reasonable number here for the evidence given the negation of Christianity?
For the proposition that Jesus' disciples would claim that the tomb was empty,
and see him after his death,
and see him after his death.
Yeah. Well, but those are two different, items of evidence, and it might,
I guess, right? Because we said that
it might.
So in this case, it's the conjunction of the minimal facts.
Well, then 10% is extremely generous because because people don't act that way.
Yeah.
There's probably not a single example in all of human history where people have, gotten that level of known conspiracy and everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I try to say, like, I know some people make like Mormonism comparisons and stuff like that. Not that they're completely analogous, but just to be charitable, I think 10% seems like we're all fairly comfortable.
Yeah, no, it's scary. I mean, I think the Mormonism case and then the Islam case both are very informative, because people would sometimes ask me, hey, what is your, what objection to Christianity makes you like the most worried? And I'd say Mormonism just instantly. And they're like, what are you talking about? Mormonism is like the least rational, least based thing ever. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. And they're growing, and they've got millions of people who believe this abject nonsense with zero basis in reality. And so it's like, man, it's just freaking scary.
To an angel in the golden plates, even though we don't think that's true. So like you can have eyewitnesses, group eyewitnesses to stuff that's not credible. And I think that's just the point. I'm trying to be generous here. So I think 10% seems pretty fair. I mean, it's
extremely generous, and it's also not going to matter as we start to look at more pieces of data. So let's see how this affects our graph. So now we've got 90%, expected. So basically we're saying that the first number that we inputted, the evidence given Christianity, 90% probability. Now, the second figure that we got to factor in is what is the probability of the evidence given the negation of Christianity. Now we're setting that at 10%. Okay, so 90% for the first one, 10% for the second one, and just see what happens after we update on the single piece of evidence.
Yeah, and you just might point out that's typically called a Bayes factor of 9, because it's a 9-to-1 ratio in the likelihoods. Right,
and it actually shows that. I don't know if you can read it there on the left-hand side, Trent. Really after I hit enter, it's going to show us a 9 Bayes factor. Yeah.
Well, and are we already at 61% in favor now?
So we are now at 61% probability that Christianity is true.
Just from that, wow. That's good.
Just from that. And this is, again, very conservative, right? We're being very conservative. 61% chance that Christianity is true based on the resurrection. And we're using conservative numbers. And this is one piece of evidence.
And that's starting at Christianity being at 10. So we've had a 6-fold increase from that piece of evidence.
I think it was at 15, right?
15 and 85.
15, right, yeah.
Okay, so then that's a fourfold increase off of that piece of evidence.
Let me see if I can increase it a little bit. Is that easier to read?
A little bit.
A little bit.
Okay. Yeah, we can't get too zoomed in, otherwise we're not going to be able to see these bars. Yeah. So just to kind of reiterate what's going on with these bars here. So this gray portion is the possibility space on the negation of Christianity that's being sort of ruled out. And what's left over here gets stacked on top of this other bar, the portion of the Christian hypothesis that remains. And then these two, this is the leftover of both hypotheses. And then you renormalize over the total probability. And then these are the final posteriors. So posterior probability is just...
Yeah, and all that renormalizing means is, I think most people will have observed this, but the bottom bar just has to have the same proportion as the bar above it. It's just that the sum of the two equals 1 versus, because one is at the end point. And so the bar above the bottom bar, the penultimate bar, doesn't measure 1. And that's a logical problem. So all that you do in renormalization is maintain the exact same proportion between green and orange, but you just make that bar a single unit that satisfies your axiom of negation, proposition and its negation adding to 1. It's a very trivial. There's nothing spooky about that at all. And it's only ever the proportions that matter. The reality is, even thinking of probabilities as being bounded by 0 and 100 is technically optional.
All right, let's now move to our second piece of evidence, and we're going to see what this does to the numbers. So the second piece of evidence is Calanda. So let's go ahead and input that in, and then we're going to turn it over to Caleb to give us a quick rundown of what Calanda is, and then we're going to see how this impacts the ratios.
Perfect. Can you see the screen, by the way?
Let me pull it up. There it is.
Probably need to pull that up. Perfect. So I won't go over this as a lecture. I have a whole paper on this on academia.com if you want to read it, called When God Healed an Amputee. Just look up my name with that if you want the 36-page version of it. But I promise not all the miracles in this stream are going to be from the 17th century or older. Most of them are more recent. But this one's particularly unique because it involves a very dramatic case. So to give you the very short version, you have a peasant in 17th century Spain named Miguel Juan Pellicer. In 1637, he gets his tibia injured, fractured, the bone sticking out. He has to go get it amputated at a hospital up in Zaragoza, Spain. He becomes a beggar for 2.5 years. He gets a license to beg, and he would constantly pray for the Virgin Mary to heal him. He was very devout to her. There was a particular Marian apparition associated with that city that he was in. Anyway, he goes back home to Calanda after 2.5 years and is staying with his family. And one night, he has a dream of the Virgin Mary appearing to him and rubbing his leg with holy oil. When he wakes up, he discovers, and his parents discover, that he has 2 legs again. And not only does he have 2 legs, but the leg that returned had the same birthmarks and scars and stuff like that as his previous leg. So the Archbishop of Zaragoza called for an investigation, and we have full documentation. I'm sorry, these are the pictures of the leg coming back of them discovering that there. So you have those paintings of it. So some of the historical sources we have when you compare to the resurrection are actually pretty incredible. This one on the left here is an affidavit. This was written 3 days after this miracle happened. The miracle allegedly happened on March 29th of 1640. This notary was signed on April 2nd of 1640. And this notary summarizes the testimony of about 10 eyewitnesses, most of whom were neighbors and relatives of Miguel, who said that they saw him come back to Calanda, that they touched his stump. They were certain that he had an amputated leg. They talked to him for hours, and that they now verified that his leg was back. That one on the right there is our most extensive documentation. That comes from 2 months, only 2 months after the miracle happened in June of 1640. It is the actual trial minutes. So they had a deposition where they had 24 different witnesses come, swear on oath of how they knew Miguel. This also includes 4 of these 24 witnesses were hospital staffers, 2 which were doctors who said that they cut the leg off. One was a hospital staffer who said that he cauterized the leg and buried it. And many of the other ones are people who knew Miguel, who all testified to seeing him with one leg, to touching the stump prior to it, and having a leg come back. So point is to say that this is a pretty incredible miracle. It doesn't need to be said that legs typically don't come back, especially the same kinds of legs. So the question is, given Christianity, what's the probability that you'd expect much very contemporaneous, very early, very numerous testimony, including from doctors from this time period, claiming to have seen a guy without a leg and that he now has a leg? versus on its negation of there being some kind of mass hysteria, some conspiracy from the church, some kind of propaganda to promote the Marian apparition, what have you. So that's sort of how I see that in this case. Cam, are you muted?
Oh yeah, I was muted. So now let's turn to the fun part, which is the numbers. What is the probability of that evidence given Christianity? Now, I think, again, to be generous, I think a 0.5, 50% chance is very generous. But Than, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it depends on how you're precisifying some of these things, I guess. If that makes sense. But I don't want to open up that whole can of weeds for that discussion again. So I'm happy with 0.5 being a generous number for this, I think.
All right. What about you, Trent?
Well, I'm struggling because, again,
Gonna
so
open up the can of worms.
if you go super particular, then it's abysmally small, right? What's the probability that this dude would have his leg off, but like super, like nothing?
What's the probability that someone would have their amputated leg healed at some point in Christian history with a Christian?
Now that would be very high. However, again, if you use that level of generality here, then you also have to use it back on that whole, somebody at some point in history would have a religious leader that, so you got to be fair and keep them at approximately the same level of generality. And so I think, okay, well, what did I say above for the resurrection, for the claims for the empty tomb? It was that these disciples would claim that. So you anchor it to the time, these particular people. You don't make it, and it would be at that time.
Right.
So
I think you could just say, what's the probability of like credible testimony of an amputee like miracle where you'd have dozens of witnesses, right? Had Christianity be true, versus what's the probability that you would have false testimony that's mistaken or lying of a report that wasn't true, given the negation.
So one way to think about level of generality is to think about when you're making the assessment. Okay. So let's just run two different models really quick. So one is the angels are in heaven and God has just said, the Father has said, I'm going to have the second person become incarnate and redeem mankind. And then the angels are like, cool, that's awesome. And then the proposition is, what is the probability that Saul of Tarsus will in, whatever, 33 AD? Well, it's like super small, right? There's absolutely nothing to suggest that he would do it. It would be 1 in 30 billion or something like that, right?
Right.
Okay, well, that's not a relevant standpoint, though. Okay, so let's say you're standing in 33, 34 AD or whatever it is, AD 33, 34, and you've seen Saul persecute the Christians, and now he's making this claim. You're like, what's the probability that dude over there that you've been watching is all of a sudden doing this? I think that's a reasonable sort of place to put our Bayesian observer. And if we do that there, we got to do it here and say, okay, well, you're kind of a contemporary and you have no personal knowledge of any of these prior conditions, but you're in 1640 or whatever, and all of a sudden you've got these guys claiming that this guy over there that lives in this village, an hour's donkey ride away or whatever it is making this claim, and these people are signing off on it. Well, you think, okay, well, since he prayed, I think you do have to include context, like he prayed to Mary and things like that, that he was making specifically Christian prayers. Say, well,
Right.
how likely would that be given that Christianity were true? Well, lots of prayers go unanswered. So if it's just what's the probability that his prayers would be answered if Christianity were true versus Christianity's true, and also he just got lucky.
Yeah. Well,
That's not very, that one. This isn't like cancer and remission though. So it'd be
right, and that's what I was
all
going to
these
say.
things were fabricated.
Yeah, I think the only realistic option you could say is that the leg was never gone and that he faked being amputee, which is what some people say. And I go into the paper of all the stuff about that. But I would just say that even in general, like today and in history, there's really not many like well-known like missing limb stories. Like even ones that are fictional are typically not like don't have many eyewitness. Like I don't even know of another case, unless you all can think of one in history, fake or real, where people like you have over a few people like claim, oh, we saw a limb come back. Like it's not even a claim that's even commonly made, let alone like whether it's credible or not. It's not even something you hear most people talk about, right? Like you hear cancer stories, you don't even hear people claim missing limb stories that often, right? So I don't think it's very likely that you'd have a claim like that if it was false. It's not abysmally low, but it's not a common. It's not like a blind person seeing or like a cancer mission. It's not a common claim people typically make. Even resurrections are common.
Trent, the other thing that I have in my mind too, really quickly, is on the precisification question. We can just still have a low probability of the Calanda evidence given Christianity if we're just speaking in really precise terms. But then we can also just say that the probability is also just relatively equally as low on a precisification for the Christianity hypothesis. In other words, like
that's one cool thing about Bayes is that even if you have really low numbers here, it's still going to favor one hypothesis. That's something that gets pointed out in the context of fine tuning too.
Yeah, I think you can say that it's not going to be very high. It might be lower than 50, but I don't think the skeptic one's going to be very high either.
So Caleb, the basic idea is like if we go super general and say something like at some point in history, somebody with a limb given Christianity will have it regrown. That's going to be higher than the precise miracle of Calanda that we're talking about. Right. So you can go with the general scale, you could just say 0.5 versus like 0.000001 or something like that, right? But then if we go precise, we can go, okay, 0.001 for Christianity, but then on the precise scale for the non-Christian hypotheses, it'd be like 0.00000000000. Like it would be relatively the same. The ratio would still produce a similar result, despite the probabilities themselves being different. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. Again, I'm okay. I'm okay with saying like I don't know if we want to be generous, like. Given Christianity, the chances of this happening are like 10% under Christianity and under not Christianity, like 0.5%, 1%. I don't know if that's too, if I'm being too uncharitable to the skeptic. As I said, I don't think.
What did you give for Christianity? What are you saying it would be on Christianity?
Maybe 10%. Do you think it'd be a lot lower than that?
Yeah, like I think it's something more like that. I don't think it's 50-50 at all. I think it's
I think we can say 10% for Christianity and under not Christianity. I think it should be like 0.5 to 1. And I already justified that by saying like even most skeptics are going to grant we don't have a lot of like limb growing back stories in general in religions, like especially like at least firsthand ones. I'm not going to count like late legends because it's not really analogous evidence, but you really don't have many examples at all of like many eyewitnesses testifying to something like that. So it doesn't seem like it's a very frequent either. So
all right, so let's set a 10% chance for the evidence on Christianity. And we're trying to be generous here. So then what would the probability of the evidence be on the negation of Christianity? What would be a generous number to assign here? 1%?
I think 1% is fair.
That sound good to you, Trent?
Say 1 and 2. Yeah, one for the not C and 0.1 for C.
Okay. So 1% chance. Let's see what it does. Ooh.
94%. Wow.
So now we've got a posterior of 94% for Christianity being true. So that's really cool. I mean, you can see this leftover margin here. We've even got a slider where you can zoom in. So let me zoom in a little bit so you can see. Oh no, we can't do that. Okay, never mind. The the slider, the zoom slider isn't working because we're so zoomed into the software. But basically what you can see here is that, so 90% of the possibility space on Christianity has been removed and only 10% is left. So that's what is left over here. And then only 1% of the negation of Christianity is left over. And then we renormalize, and this is what's left over. 94% probability that Christianity is true, 0.05 or a 5% chance that Christianity is false. And this is after just two pieces of evidence.
There's a chance.
Just after two pieces of evidence, and we're being very generous with the numbers.
Yeah. And so going forward, I think we need to keep the generalities in mind, because all of these are going to be the same thing of, well, this particular person receiving a miracle versus not, you're going to kind of have to be, I think, more broad of like this kind of remission or this kind of healing happening under credible testimony of this kind of healing and reports or whatever it is happening under Christianity versus not. So I think that's the basis that I think would make sense to keep it fairly general. But
all right, let's move to our third piece of evidence. And this one I want to discuss Zetun.
Okay.
Do you have any slides on that one?
I did not. No, I know you've done a video, but I mean, you can summarize it. I can summarize it either way.
Yeah, you've done work on this. We've talked about it a bunch. I think Trent, you and I have talked about this. I'm sure Than is familiar, but for the audience, so in oh, nice. I think it was 1960. Was it 68 or 69?
67. Oh no, sorry, 68. It was 68. You're right. 68.
68. Yeah, because it ended in 71. So over the course of 3 years in this, over this Coptic church in Zetun, Egypt, which is a suburb of Cairo, there were these apparitions that happened and occurred over the course of 3 years. They started to get less and less over the years. But at first, it was actually a Muslim that first saw this figure above this Coptic church, and they basically immediately identified it as Mary. There's a bunch of healings that were involved. The government shut off power to the entire section of that suburb, and it was still happening. And there were, I think, estimated up to 1 million people saw this over the course of the 3 years. So there's all of these reports of this apparition, this glowing apparition that looked like a human figure. Sometimes there would be these doves that would fly around her and go in the shape of a cross. Sometimes they'd be in a circle. Excuse me. There's also incense, reports of incense that would float up above her in above the church, and they would smell it as well. All sorts of really interesting things. Caleb, what details am I missing here?
You mentioned that they shut the power off. There were photographs. Granted, some of them are altered, but some of them are not in that sense. So I guess for this particular one, we would want to look at like, what's the probability of sort of a mass miracle in terms of God appearing or sending an angel or Mary or whatever to like a large group of people for the purposes of, I guess, conversion, which is what happened in a lot of cases like this. So
yeah, and what's another interesting thing about this is that in Egypt, obviously a majority Muslim country, and so this
90% of them are, yeah.
This is important because this happened in a sort of, I guess, hostile context. So it wasn't like a bunch of Christians that were primed to see something happen like this. The first person to see it was, in fact, a Muslim. And so I think that's also relevant when we're talking about the probabilities of this occurring, because some people want to say, well, mass hallucination might explain this, but there are thousands and thousands of eyewitness reports that we have with us. And there are books written on this. You guys can dive pretty deep into the evidence. I've had Travis Dumsday on the show to talk about this miracle. Mm-hmm. But let's start talking about some of the numbers. So on this sort of generality, the level of generality that we've been giving to these previous miracles, Trent, what would you say is the probability? Should we just follow a similar heuristic as we did for Calanda on this one, or do you think that the probabilities are actually different?
Yeah, I don't think I would give quite as high of this one, just because it's a little more. I'm just speaking shooting from the hip here. It just seems a little more squishy, like a guy having here's what I can say with confidence. This should not be as high as a guy who's like got people swearing that they saw a stump and then a leg. That's so specific. That's so physical, so tangible. This one's like, okay, well, that's pretty weird and unexpected, but it's nothing like a guy that says, I swear to you, I saw a stump and then I saw a leg. I don't think they're even close. I would put this one at like 3%.
It's funny you say that though, Trent, because I agree with you in principle, but I kind of find like the category more interesting with Zetun, because I feel like I would expect more of like, okay, God or an angel, whatever, sends down and converts lots of people in this way, right? Whereas I feel like to say, okay, God, why would God heal a random guy in a country that's already really heavily Catholic? Like it seems like kind of redundant, right? Whereas in this case, you have a lot of conversions associated with it. And so I guess it seems like God's intention to be more clear.
But we also have
that, and there's also healings at Zetun.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but is that part of the datum? Like we got to be
yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
so the evidence here is a conjunction of approximately how many conjuncts?
Ooh.
A lot.
Well, we have millions. We have potentially up to 1 million people that saw this. We have thousands of eyewitness reports. We have photographs.
So in the photographs, Can I query these a little bit, especially since we have Caleb here who might actually know the answers? Because I'm not asking these questions as though nobody knows the answer. They're just literally, I am stream of consciousness. These are just things that come to my mind. Can I ask Caleb a few questions about some of the details?
Sure.
Because I mean, people that are listening that are skeptical are going to have the same thoughts I'm having.
Yeah.
On the photographs, are you familiar with the Cottingley Ferry hoax?
Yes.
That like,
Yep.
right. So that's what I think of when I think photographs. I'm like, I've seen photographs of ferries that are extremely hard to explain how they did that. They didn't have the technology. These were children, So, but I come into this discussion with the following belief. Super low tech people you would not expect to have the resources to fake photographs can do so. So I already believe that. So why should I think that these photographs have not been altered?
So I think there was an analysis done. I want to say it was in like the 80s by, I forget his first name, someone named Jackson, not me, but another one. And I think he confirmed that there were a few that were touched up, but in general, some of them were, most of them were like relatively authentic. There are ones where they've definitely like outlined more details to make the Marian figure more clear, but most of those you can find the original photographs where it's much more sort of blurry and you can see there's a figure there. I don't know if you can see this real fast. Cam, can I share this other one too? I'm trying to bring up some photos real fast.
Yes.
We don't have to go on this point too long. Okay, hold on. Do I have to go to a different tab here? Okay, let me stop share real fast. Share Lady of Zetun. Yeah, let's do that one. So there's a couple here. So like this one is touched up significantly, but this is like the original photo to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about. You can see the dove there. You can see what looks like a figure, kind of, you can make out a little bit of a halo. You get this kind of thing, right? Where there are definitely touched up versions of this, but you can kind of see the outline, right? So to my knowledge, here's another one, like kind of a consistent shape with this sort of thing, right? So even if we're granting that these have been like touched up, to my knowledge, people who've looked at these have said, generally speaking, these are authentic, at least like the core base of it is. So that's kind of what we mean when we say that. But I grant that photographs are not like the hardest piece of evidence for it.
So what do we have? The million people saw that well,
they disagreed because it was moving. So sometimes it took that form. Sometimes it'd be moving around the dome. So it was some people, so it definitely wasn't consistent. And I think the biggest issue too is there wasn't like a clear message. Like it never spoke to anyone. It never said, I am the Blessed Mother, convert to Christianity, whatever, right? So I don't know if that'd be expected under this kind of thing. Whereas if it's going to appear to people, is it going to have some kind of message, right? Or just going to do some spooky stuff around a church and then leave? So it's kind of hard. So I don't know. I'm kind of inclined to think the kind of miracle makes more sense than the Calanda one, but I grant that the ambiguity is there to where it's not clear. Like, was this Mary? It never claimed to be Mary. It didn't have a message, but it led to a lot of good fruits. So...
Well, it also happened over a Coptic Christian church.
Yeah. Right.
It didn't happen over a mosque or...
And it happened in a hostile environment, which I think is what you'd expect from a miracle. I think like a mass miracle, it makes more sense to me that God would do that in an environment that was mostly not Christian than like Calanda, where everyone was already basically Catholic anyway. So like what message is being conveyed, it's less.
Well, they may not have been very faithful Catholics if it's like most Catholic countries.
That's true. That's true. But
so Caleb, just one more question. What do people who what are the alternative hypotheses that people offer for this?
So the only one that's really gotten much attention in peer review is the idea of earthquake lights, which is sort of this weird phenomenon. Earthquake lights. So apparently when there's enough friction, it can cause electromagnetism to where it creates like some lights in the sky sometimes.
Yeah, my grandma saw that. My grandma saw that.
Yeah. So there was a paper published in a geology journal that discussed that made that hypothesis, and they tried to show a correlation between the earthquakes and stuff like that. But that got kind of widely rejected because they were using it like the basis was within a 400-mile radius, and yet they're saying that they all showed up on top of this church consistently within which seems kind of hard to believe that you'd have that much consistency with that big of a range.
I would have thought that people would claim that
wouldn't
the
explain
Coptic,
like the red clouds or anything either, though, Caleb, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I would have thought that
we were going to say the hoax theory.
Yeah, the people just saying it's just a bunch of Coptic people trying to promote their, church.
Yeah, but you got to get specific about like what hypothesis are we proposing here? Naturally, is it like, because this was in the 70s, right? Like holograms, like what's the explanation?
I don't think you could. I'm not sure you could even fake this convincingly today without like drones or something, because if they cut the power out, the only thing you could have is a generator. And generators back then were not like the little electric ones we have now. They were the big like oil ones that were huge and also where it's about as loud as a lawnmower. And you'd have to like mount
candles and lenses. What about candles and lenses? You can do amazing things with like, where they have like kind of lighthouse things that are just fairly small fires. But if you put a lens just right, it's amazing how much you can magnify them.
But wouldn't you be able to see the beam though of where like it's coming from?
Yeah,
like a movie projector kind of thing. Like you could usually just see where that's coming from. And like
another fact about this trend is that they had to like, because there were so many people coming in and trying to see these apparitions, they had to cut away the trees and. It happened at night often. And so there was just so many people there. We would have had some report, somebody saying something that they saw a beam coming from somewhere. They saw something else on top of the church beforehand. Another fact that's sort of interesting is that there were reports of it, like the way that it would first appear as like sometimes just as a ball of light, and then it would grow into the shape of a person. And then the doves would appear. Then they would see the cloud of smoke. And so the way that it's described in the eyewitness reports is also, I think, important and relevant to rolling out these natural hypotheses.
So this
very
is
interesting
this
case.
is
very interesting case.
Yeah. So this brings up
of like people claiming to have been healed of gangrene and there's a bunch of other miracles that are associated with this that are miraculous healings.
The first guy that actually saw it, the Muslim, I forget his name, he was the first one to actually report a healing. I think his finger was bandaged. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Caleb, his finger was bandaged.
He was the first one to see it, and he said, "Oh, like what's that? Like, is that?" He thought it was a nun who was actually going to jump off the building before people saw it as a light in the Virgin Mary. And when he took the bandage off a few days later, this is what the newspaper reported, is that his finger was healed.
Yeah, so this brings up, I mean, that's all very, very fascinating. This brings up a point about weighting the evidence by doubt. So Richard Jeffrey he was a probability theorist that did some really, really important work about how you factor your doubt about a situation into reasoning. And so, and I almost said this during the resurrection one, because I was saying you might think that if the datum is that Matthew reported this, or that Mark or Luke reported this, you might think, okay, well, the gospel says that, but I have doubts that that was written by Luke.
Right.
Okay, well, suppose you've got some doubts, then take then weight it by the strength of your doubt, right? So you're saying like, I'm actually only like 85% convinced that it was written by Luke. I say, okay, well then take your probability and
We actually have a way to
multiply
model that, but I think it'd be a little bit too complicated.
But the way we can model it with the present software is just to say, okay, so just wait and then make your assignation be the product of if that were true times the probability that you think is true. And it basically that's Jeffrey conditionalization. So suppose I take these reports, what is the probability that a million people saw this, that this was on TV? Well, suppose I find myself just being really skeptical, like I'm not sure I believed any of that happened. I've got about 10% doubt that any of this ever happened, that there was a million people or that anybody did take these pictures. Okay, well, I don't have to be stuck. I can take your number and I can take it for me. I can say, I'm going to take that times 0.9 because I have these just like baseline skeptical tendencies that make me doubt any of it. And so if you want, you know what I'm saying? I'm saying there are technical methods that have been proposed for dealing with these things. And there are perfectly great standard examples of real world circumstances where you have to do these sort of weightings of a generic background doubt. So I would say for the purposes of this exercise, y'all take a number and then just take it times 0.9 for my sake and just see what happens.
All right, so let's just do 0.09. So 10% chance times 0.9, 0.09, 9%.
So 9%. Okay.
9% that this happened on Christianity. And then for the negation of Christianity, what are we going to say?
I mean, again, this is one where we don't really have, there are some parallels like other Marian apparitions in Egypt, but like, we don't know that those are fake either. So I think you'd need to find like, do we have any examples where there's been this big of a hoax perpetuated in this kind of way with like that much investigation that turned out to be fake? And I'm not aware of anything that's going to be that comparable outside of the other
aliens
ones. Yeah, so I feel like under naturalism it'd be very hard to fake this or get to with the investigations and get past it and like not be caught. So I think it's pretty low that you get this level of like hoaxing without it being caught by someone. So I think it'd be like, again, I want to say 1% being generous, but I think it's probably like 0.8% or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It would be super helpful to have examples of major hoaxes that have actually occurred. We ought to have a database of actual large scale hoaxes that are known to have been hoaxes. We can kind of compare like, okay, well, we know this sort of thing could happen. Wasn't there some sort of big faked child abduction in the 19th century by some major famous family like Rothschilds or something like that? Does that ring a bell at all?
I think I vaguely might know what you're talking about, but
I think we might be getting a little bit off here. Let's because I kind of want to move on to the next example as well.
But for pedagogical purposes,
to go through now, he doesn't want to spend all day here.
For pedagogical purposes, it's very worth mentioning a heuristic for how we go about setting these things. And I don't want to go through any cases, but it actually would be extremely helpful to me to think through how unlikely I think a sort of conspiracy theory is to have before my mind the biggest, baddest conspiracy theories that have turned out to be true. I'm content with 0.09. I'm not saying to change it. I'm just saying.
Why don't we do like 2% to be generous? Maybe. I mean, look, we're already at 94%, like with the other evidence, not counting this one. So I think to just say
2% on the negation of Christianity. That seems too high.
Oh.
I agree, but again, we're being. I think just being generous for.
I want 2%. I want 2%, just reserved for sheer weirdness. Like, man, come on, this seems crazy.
So 9% on the evidence given Christianity and 2% on the evidence given the negation of Christianity. Is that where we're going with?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do it. Let's see what happens.
All right. Already at 98%. So, yeah.
98%. We've got a cumulative Bayes factor of 405 for C over not C.
So
that's what I was saying. Just
I got to go somewhat soon, but Caleb, like, how many of these sorts of stories could you bring forth if you had a full hour to just enumerate them?
Gosh, I think in the book I have probably close to 50. So like 50? We're just doing unadulterated 50. And that's of the ones that I've done. If you want the actual, like, I mean, I'm not going to talk too long here, but the Catholic Church, has a process for canonizing saints that when you have to have miracles, right? So they have a peer review process. So if you were going just in the 20th century of like miracles that have passed the Vatican's peer review, it's, I think, about 550 is what it is. Just the 1900s, just those that have passed peer review. So even if you took a fraction of those, that would be a lot. So it's a lot.
I think I see where this is going.
Yeah, I know. So I have, I think, 5 or 6 more on here, but they're all healing adjacent miracles, so they probably are going to be relatively similar.
Looks like Caleb is frozen. Oh, there he is. You're back.
He's back.
Yeah, you froze, but you're back.
He's thawed.
It was those.
All right, let's add another one. What is the next one, Caleb?
All right, so the rest of these are going to be healing, so I think they'll be relatively similar probability wise. All right, I will do this one fast. This is Peter Smith, 1921. I'm going in order, by the way, chronologically, so they're going to get more recent as we go on. So Peter Smith was a baby. He was born in 1921.
Oh, sure.
The nurse.
Do you have slides for this one or no?
Shoot. I do. I did not realize I was not sharing it. Hold on. Let me go back because we undid the sharing screen. There's not that much on this slide, but I'll do it. All right. Is that better?
There we go.
Okay, great. So Peter Smith, I got a newspaper article on the right and then 2 pictures of him as a kid here. He was born in 1921 in a hospital that was dedicated to Sister Cabrini, who had just died. When he was being cared for, the normal practice by the nurses was to put 1% silver nitrate in the newborn's eyes just to clean it. So the nurse does that. She walks away. She comes back about an hour later and she sees baby Peter crying and in extreme pain. And she looks at the bottle and she realizes that she didn't put 1% nitrate. She put 50% nitrate, which is what they use to cut through tumors. It's hard enough to burn through wood. So she realizes that she did this. 3 ophthalmologists come. She's panicked. They look at baby Peter's eyes, and apparently his corneas had just been like disintegrated at this point. His eyes were swollen shut, and the acid, the sulfate, was basically putting scars all around his eyes. And so they were saying, like, yeah, the chances, there's no way he's not going to be blinded from this. So out of desperation, all the nurses in the convent get together and they pray for the intercession of Sister Cabrini to heal Peter in this way. The next morning when they do this, Peter's eyes are perfectly normal again. The retinas are back in place. The corneas are back in place. He had no vision problems. The only thing that was left was the scar tissue that was under his eyelids. But even that went away when he got older. He also got a fever the next day because of the fumes from the silver nitrate, I guess, had like burned his lungs. But they did a second prayer and the pneumonia also resolved. So you kind of get a 2-for-1 here, right? So the Vatican looked into this. They eventually said this was medically inexplicable when they talked to his doctors, got his medical records. And so Sister Cabrini was canonized as America's very first saint at that point. So that's the short version of that. So yeah, you can see pictures here. Peter, I don't know how well you can see it here, but he has scars under his eyes. This when he was still younger. And this is him reading. The only thing he had glasses for was reading small font, but otherwise he had perfectly normal eyesight for his age. So pretty cool stuff.
Wow. Since Trent is gone, I'm going to skip forward a little bit and just copy what we have for Calanda. So did you hear that? Did you hear that presentation?
I did. Yeah. I had to go to the bathroom so bad, but yeah, this is fascinating stuff, man.
Yeah. I mean, I get a lot of attention. That's why I wanted to talk about it.
So to kind of streamline what we're doing here, maybe we should just copy the figures that we have for Calanda on this one and just see what happens.
Yeah, sure. I think that's fair. I'm going to say just, so 10, I was even going to ask.
So 10%, 1%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
10%.
Because it's clearly.
I mean, maybe we can do a little bit higher than one. I think you could say 10% and maybe, I think 2% is generous. And I'm only saying that because with Calanda, it's like more clear cut. I think with this one, you could argue, well, was it really 50% nitrate? Did they misremember? Did they panic and misdiagnose it with
That's
how
fair.
bad the corneas were damaged or whatever? Like, again, just being generous here. So I don't think it's likely, but I don't.
Yeah.
I will say though,
I
do in the book. Yeah, and in the book, I talk about other cases like this. They actually, unfortunately, this has actually happened multiple times with like babies getting the wrong nitrate. There are medical journals like that talk about that. And in every case I could find where that happened, where the nitrate was put in the baby's eyes, usually it was either irreversible blindness or they had to have some kind of cornea surgery where they like adjusted it surgically. But there's no way it goes away on its own. So this is the only case that I could find medically where that's ever happened, and that was when they, prayed the
I like that. I like that reasoning, Caleb. And one thing that would be really cool would be to think about a set of features, a set of scalar features that you could evaluate each miracle claim on. Like you've got one that is specificity, one that is ability to fake, say, fake ability,
Yeah.
one that is precision. I would love to talk with you about coming up with a standard rubric where you could basically
awesome.
make a set of columns of features and say, okay, well, this one has, a stronger alternative hypothesis than this one does. This one, and then to say, hey, well, we could sort of get at least make progress on an objective list evaluation that would give you one rubric to apply to all these claims to sort of rank them comparatively to one another.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great idea
fascinating
in the future for sure. Yeah, I'd love to do that. You can help out with the book with that way. We'll go over the probabilities and that stuff. That'd be great. So, do we have the numbers for that one?
Tell you about that tomorrow, actually.
Yeah, so this one is already inputted. So we've got 10% for Christianity and 2% for the negation, and now we are at 99.72% chance that Christianity
is those numbers up.
Now, and now that we're here on probability, remember what I said earlier about how much bigger 99.9 is than 99?
Yeah.
Right.
And how much bigger 99.99 is than that. So surely in our next one, right, basically what's going to happen from here on out is the nines are going to start extending one more decimal place, right? And so this is going to really, these numbers are huge. They're bigger. The jump between the last one and this one from like 98.6 to 99.7 is a much bigger jump than I think people are appreciating without thinking of it in terms of your exception rate.
I think our cumulative Bayes factor on the previous one was 405, and now we're at 2025. After just, a cumulative Bayes of just 5. So, it's crazy. And we're only how many in? We're only in 4 pieces of evidence.
Yeah, as I said, if you're counting just the Vatican in the 20th century, we'd have like 450.
Now, this is a good time to point out, as one always does when you're talking about theistic arguments, that nobody's suggesting that this is the final probability of theism to court, right? Because you have to then also, we haven't talked about the problem of evil. We haven't talked about, miracle claims for alternative religions and that sort of thing. So nobody's claiming that now, based on these 4 pieces of evidence, our confidence in Christianity ought to be 99.721, right? Nobody's claiming that. Is anybody here claiming that?
No. What we're showing is the impact of the evidence that bears on the proposition in question, and so we would have to do, in order to say that this is the final posterior. We'd have to take in everything into account. But I think what you can see, based on also what Caleb said earlier, is that we're only really scratching the surface here. So we'd have to take into account, if we did something like that, Trent, we'd have to like go through all of the miracles for Christianity that we know of. And I think once we do that, and then we factor in the problem of evil, and we factor in everything else, I think we're going to still arrive at just an absurdly high probability.
Like review, like critical miracles. I don't mean every single miracle claim of every testimony. I mean like ones that have gone through the process of peer review and like documentation, like the ones we've included here. So just having those controls.
Well, it's clear. It's very clear that this quickly converges arbitrarily close to 1. Now, in a follow-up show, I think it would be absolutely fascinating to evaluate miracle claims for other religions and how the case, just do the same thing for Buddhism, do the same thing for Islam. I would love to do that. That would be super fun to do.
Now let's do something fun. Let's change our priors. Okay, let's say that we got our priors wrong. All right, so let's go down to a 1% chance that Christianity is true, a 99% chance that Christianity is false. Let's start there.
Yeah,
and see what happens to the posteriors. So now after 4 pieces of evidence, we're still at 95%.
Let's keep it at 1 just to have it there, I think, as we move forward.
Yeah. So if you start out with a 1%, which I mean, like who is reasonably at a 1% chance that Christianity is true? Not a lot of people.
You might think from academia, you meet people.
I have YouTube skeptics that tell me, 200 billion people have lived and none have risen from the dead. So the prior's at least going to be 1 over 200 billion.
Yeah, that's how that works.
All right, let's get to another piece of evidence. We'll leave those numbers there, and let's see what happens when we add another piece of evidence. Caleb, what's our next one?
All right, our next one is going to be. Sorry, I forgot to show this one. The last one. This is actually Peter Smith when he was. He became a priest after this. That's him next to the body of Saint Cabrini. So that's pretty cool. Sorry, forgot to show that one. All right. Next one of my favorites is Matthew Pellissieri. And no, I did not spell his name wrong. That's actually how it's spelled because it's an Indian variation of the name. So he had Talipes equinovirus, which is the fancy way of saying double club foot. So if you actually see the photo here, this was when he was 4 years old. The feet are clubbed like that in the middle. He couldn't walk until he was 5 years old. And even then he was walking on the sides of his feet. He was really horribly bullied in school. It was actually pretty sad. Document on the left there is from his doctor who actually birthed him from when he was first delivered. And he verified that he was born with this condition, a congenital double clubfoot. This is not something that goes away on its own. The only way you can correct this is through splinting or surgery. They were a very poor family in India. They could not afford that. So he grew up for the first 14 years of his life like this, walking on the sides of his feet, severely crippled, couldn't move around very much, having to sort of lean on walls and stuff like that. His family then participates in a fast and novena towards, I believe it was Sister Teresa Kiramel, who had been a recently deceased Indian nun who they were praying for. I think she was venerable at that point. And as they were doing this, he during this novena, he falls asleep after praying, and he has a vision where Sister Kiramel appears to him. And when he wakes up, he finds that one of his legs is completely straightened. The next year, they do this exact same thing again. They have the same novena. She appears to him in a second dream. The other leg is completely straightened. So if you want to see on here, this photo in the middle there of him standing, that is him about a year after the legs were straightened. So there's a close-up version of that. And then you can see one later in better color when he was older. Obviously, you can tell from the feet that they're still like atrophied and they don't you can tell they were messed up, but he can walk on them now. They're fully functional. And there was an x-ray on the left there to show how the bone and ligaments had sort of reconfigured in this way. And it's cool because when the doctors reviewed this and confirmed this as a miracle for the Vatican, they pointed out that the way that his feet were corrected, it looked as if it was by surgery, but there was no like surgical scars or marks. So you could tell that it was like that he had originally been crippled and now he's not. So it's kind of like leaving those little tidbits, sort of like how Jesus had the scars on his body when he was resurrected. You have these like the marks of surgery, but without actual surgery. And his doctor confirmed that he had never had any treatment. So personally, for me, I think this one is very interesting because you have like photographic evidence, x-rays, and this is one that's a very visibly obvious thing that I don't think you could reasonably be mistaken about. And it's not something that just goes away. So I think the probability of a misdiagnosis or some spontaneous remission is extremely low in this case, in my opinion. Yes, Trent.
So at what age did this miracle purportedly occur?
He was 14, I believe.
Okay, so these pictures are from right after and then going through a ways. Do we have pictures of him at Are there pictures of him at 13 or 12 or 11? Because
Not to my knowledge.
the first thing my mind goes to is, okay, well, I can picture, okay, braces. You know, I was pigeon-toed as a kid, and my mom didn't want me to put braces on, and so every night she would, stretch my legs at home, and it made permanent corrections to my. Now it wasn't anything like that, but like,
Yeah.
I'd really want to see pictures of him at, say 12, 13, to show that there wasn't a gradual, step by step. Because you can imagine going from that 4-year-old picture to this 15-year-old picture. That's 11 years. So if you divide what he looked like in the age 4 picture to the age 15 picture into 11 half steps, I can picture that happening as a result of assisted stretching, and maybe they even break it, right? Maybe they're like, we have to. This is super important. It's important enough. We have to cause this pain, and we break the ankles or whatever we have to do.
Sure,
I can totally see that happen.
Sure, but your theory would then entail that the testimony of him and his parents and his doctors who confirmed that he had never had anything like this surgically would just be false. Then they'd be basically lying.
Well, not surgically, but stretching his legs is not surgically. I mean, his parents. I'm envisioning his parents doing this.
Yeah, but it would be like professional splinting. I mean, like from what the doctor's reports had said, like it was clear that it looked like he had like professional work done and that his legs were straight and functional. And the only way that you could get the result that you got with how badly his legs
isn't it a bit weird though that there's no pictures of him at 14?
No, I mean he lived in India in the mid to late 20th century. They didn't have, this is before cell phones were around, so they didn't like photography wasn't like super.
Well, then
common.
why is there a picture of him at 4?
I think that was at his like grandmother's birthday or something from what I remember. But like my point is saying it's not like people had photo. I mean, you grew up in the 90s and 80s. Like
sure, but 11 years without a photograph?
Maybe there are. Maybe there are photos.
That's what I know of. There might be ones. That's what I had access to. I think the fact that we got pre and post pictures and x-rays at all is pretty good, to be honest. You don't even usually have that.
Sure, yeah, but I'm just saying, as a skeptically minded person, and I'm letting my mind wander unfetteredly, the difference it would make to me, my confidence would skyrocket if I saw a picture of him at 14 and they're still, radically deformed.
That's fair. I'm just saying that the only way that would realistically happen medically is if they were intentionally applying treatments to it gradually at that point. It's not something that would get better on its own without intervention.
I was actually just about to say, Trent, that because your hypothesis of them splinting the feet would actually probably predict more pictures in a more like not non-sporadic and more systematized timeline, like what you're asking for. The fact that we're not seeing that right now is probably going to be evidence for the fact that they weren't splinting the foot in the first place and that there wasn't gradual.
Somewhat. I mean, on the hypothesis that they were splinting, it makes sense that they might want to document progress photographically in some way.
Think about the this is removed from the culture of India, but
go ahead.
I still find it weird that if he's going to have a picture at his grandma's birthday at 4,
guy who's balding and he's getting hair implants, he's going to take pictures of his scalp to be like, yeah, look, it's getting better, it's getting better, it's getting better, right? In the same way, if they're splinting the foot, they're going to be tracking the gradual improvement.
That's very plausible. But also, it seems really weird that there's a picture of him at 4, and then he goes 11 years before there's another picture.
What's weirder though is the fact that we have testimony of it.
Yeah, we have
of the exact reports that Caleb described.
But those are all consistent with me being a little freaked out that there's no pictures of him for 11 years, and that the existence of those pictures would provide an order of magnitude greater confirmation, because it would prove.
So Caleb,
sorry, go ahead.
The doctor's report, what specifically did it say? Did it say that they
be honest, if I can read it. I am pleased to say that Mr. Matthew Hoseri, he says his parents' name, was born with congenital deformity of both legs, Talibus equinovarus, and I happened to attend the delivery in his house. There was no corrective procedure of this type for a deformity of legs at the time, and I believe that is a great thing in getting the feet back in the normal state. He then says his date of birth, and then he signs his name.
Yeah. So do we have any documents about checkups?
There's, I believe there are affidavits from his school teacher and some people who like went to school and like knew him, who like confirmed that he was basically crippled like this up until the point of when he was healed.
Yeah, that would go a long ways with me personally.
Yeah, but is it also because, like, again, I know if you're playing skeptic, do you concede that, like, if we were to grant that his legs really were crooked up until the moment and overnight they just went back ligaments like that, that would be like medically basically impossible? And so, like, that's kind of what the skeptic would have to say that it's gradual, because
sure. No, I mean that's why, and I'm not playing skeptic at all. I'm just skeptical.
Sure,
and
that's fine.
When I think in terms of, okay, well, what's the alternative hypothesis? The one that springs to my mind is gradual development over time from stretching, splinting, breaking, whatever, and photographs or affidavits or just data in general pertaining to the persistence of the issue in the early teen years would be really strong evidence for me.
What is the probability that the doctor would say that this can't be corrected, but then the family like figured out how to correct it?
The way that I read it is that he's saying that about at birth. There's like, because today, if that happened, they would correct it at birth. So the way I read that was, hey, I delivered this kid, and at that time, there was no way to correct this. Okay, that's fine. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't do it over 11 years of concerted effort.
Correct. Well, originally they couldn't do it because it was the hospitals that could do it were not near them, and also it was an expensive procedure, and they were a very impoverished family in India, so it just wasn't available.
Yeah, but there's tons of examples of people improvising and doing things like, oh my God, I never would have thought that you could, if you stretched somebody 6 hours a day for 11 years, holy cow, look what these people did.
Yeah, but again, we have testimony. But then it's like, why would the family like lie? Because again, we have evidence where they confirm that they didn't do this, right, and the other stuff. So like, why would they lie about it then? It's like, I just don't.
Yeah, but I don't know. But remember, as a Bayesian right now, I don't know anything about them. Maybe they would lie because they wanted to parade him about and make money. I don't know.
It also feels, isn't it weird though to think that because they were healed at different times, right? One time the vision happens, one leg is straight, and then a year passes, the other one's straight. And like,
oh yeah, no, that's
time.
Yeah, no, that's much weirder. I wish we had a picture of one leg corrected and the other one not. That seems pretty weird. Why wouldn't you take actually, now that you bring it up, why wouldn't you take a picture of that one leg and say, holy cow, look at this. This crooked leg is now straight. At least he can use a crutch or hobble or whatever. Why in the world is there not a picture of that first healing?
I don't know. Maybe there is, and I just don't have it. But I'm just grateful that I got photos at all. I mean, so many of these are just purely anecdotal. So it's nice when you actually can have like pre and post stuff. So, all right, what do we think? I thought it was fun though. What do we think of the math here though? Because
let's turn to that.
I think that it's very blatant enough to where it's like the probability of like, and now the only real, I think, option is that there's some kind of deceit. So like, I think that's the only thing you could plausibly say is a non-C model, right? Because just naturally, there's really no possible way this could happen if the details are correctly reported. So I would say, given Christianity, if we're going to give Calanda a 10 for like a leg coming back, this is pretty close to that in terms of like level of medical impossibility and like visible obviousnness. So I'd say that should be about a 10.
No, it's not. No, it's not. It's way less.
But it's more common than people missing legs, though, right? So it's like, would it be more likely that God would heal that kind of thing? I mean, this is going to get very difficult with divine psychology. But fine, what if we did like 8% then instead of 10?
I would feel more comfortable with that personally.
8 on the evidence given Christianity?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. And then on the evidence given the negation?
I want it's really 4. Low, but I think Trent wants 4. Trent, this is the most skeptical one he's been on because of the
I'm just being honest.
It's fine. I like it. I love this. I love the pushback. I think it makes for more interesting shows.
Okay. All right. So we now are at a 97% chance from 95. With
And
Matthew.
that's non-trivial.
Yeah.
It's non-trivial.
It's a non-trivial jump, because you might think, 95% is the standard, scientific threshold for credibility. Often, I think it's stupid to do that, but that's very common. And so before, it was like you're just over the minimum threshold, and now you're like, with that one piece of evidence that is not treated as though it's a glittering jewel. You now move solidly across that 95% confidence interval threshold, which is often seen to be an important threshold. So to me, the jump from 95 to closer to 98 is a very significant, for one piece of evidence to jump you like that, I think is tremendous.
Yeah.
All right. What's the next one, Caleb?
All right, we got 3 more. I'll try to speed run.
How's everyone doing on time?
I really should be gone.
Okay.
I'm trying to go relatively quick here. That's why I'm trying to keep it fast. So
yeah, let's do maybe 1 or 2 more then.
We've been going for a little over about 2 hours. Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna
1 hour 50 minutes.
Okay, I'm gonna go to the last 2 because I think they're more interesting. So I'm gonna skip one of these real fast just for the sake of time. Okay. All right. So Emma McKinley, this one involves a Christophany, so that's why I think this is interesting. So this is a woman who, in 1993, she had a work accident that caused. Oh wait, nice screen sharing. There it is. Perfect. She had a work accident where she fell off of a ladder, and it caused her to get reflex sympathy disorder, reflex sympathy dystrophy, which is one of the most painful diseases known to man. It basically causes your nerves to just instill constant pain sensations in your body. So like on a scale of 1 to 50 in the McGill pain scale, it has to be at least a 42 to give you an idea. It's very, very unbearable. Anyway, she had this, she had many neurological problems. So it caused her feet and skin color to flare up. Her foot became crooked. Her hand became atrophied and basically stuck in a fist in this way. She then had issues with her posture. So she was mostly wheelchair bound. Her position was completely in a 90-degree angle because of the way that her nerves were working. You can see her X-ray there. So she was stuck in this position, gradually worsening for about, I think it was close to 18 years or so. This was in 93. She didn't get healed to 2011. So by the time of the peak of her disability, and we have doctor's notes a few months prior to her healing that confirmed she was still in horrible condition. So there was no gradually getting better. She was gradually getting much worse. Peak of her disability, she was on 2,000 milligrams, I believe it was, of painkillers a day, which is like the legal maximum you can get without overdosing. Yeah. So she... one day on, I think it was Christmas Eve of 2011, she fell out of her wheelchair. She was at her desk and her family wasn't there at the time. So she's lying there on the floor crying and in horrible pain. It was really sad to see. And she was there for many hours. And she claims that in this sense of when she was lying there in pain, she looked up and she saw what she described was a vision of Jesus, like walking towards her, radiant in light. And what she claims is that Jesus literally grabbed her by the hand that was closed and pried it open in that way, lifted her up, her back then straightened, and she was able to walk around. Her family gets her about an hour or so later, and they find her walking out of her wheelchair for the first time. They're astonished by this. She goes back to her doctor. I have a letter from the Mayo Clinic there. Her doctor mentions that he was astonished that she was walking around now without much pain, and that she claimed that she'd had a vision of Jesus that caused this, and he was happy that she had significantly improved. And so over the course of the next a year or so, she had improvements on top of that. So she no longer, she basically started to get rid of the pain medication gradually because it's very addictive often. And by a year out, she was completely off of it. So, this is someone who was chronically disabled for close to 20 years in severe pain, mostly immobile, wheelchair bound, distorted limbs and stuff like that, who within a pretty brief amount of time is instantly healed, or at least is improved, and then the gradual healing happens after that, with explicitly Christian context, right, of Jesus healing her. So that's what she claims. I think that's a very cool story. It's very uplifting, and so yeah.
Yo, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Whoa.
You can use that.
We gotta tell him the Barbara Schneider one then, dude.
Yeah, I know. I didn't include that one on here, but that's a good one too. That one's a little similar to that one, but I think it's pretty neat.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
And I will say, looking at this is a disease that has it's pretty well documented. It can go into temporary spontaneous remission, but there's never been a case that I found where it went away instantly, that dramatically, that quickly. Usually, it only goes away very gradually, and even then, very incompletely. Most people who have it for life in different degrees, like in flare-ups. She was healed in 2011 and is still healed to this day, which is again remarkable. You don't have that kind of remission with this disease in most cases, so it's pretty remarkable.
Nice. All right, so, let's assign some numbers and try to move on so we can move on through the night. All right, 10% again on Christianity.
Why not? We'll just keep it consistent with all of these, I think.
Yeah.
I mean,
I kind of want to move it up just a little bit, just because the vision of Jesus, I feel like is more Christian.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that.
Yeah.
All right, let's say 20%.
Small goal with that.
Okay, I was going to say 12, but we can do 20. That's good. All right, 20. And I say against, I'd say.
Dude, this one has me shook. I'd go 20. I'm shook.
Okay.
Oh man.
All right, and then on the negation of Christianity,
you have to tell them about Barbara Schneider then.
Yeah, we can do that in another stream though. That's a good one. Or we can do that after or whatever. I don't know. I didn't include that one, but Than did a whole reel on it on the IP TikTok page. If you want to go look at that one, it's a good one.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
All right. Probability 1%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sorry,
man,
you talk about that. I'd say 1%, just because it's a disease that can sometimes go into remission, but not in any way that's that dramatic. So it's pretty unlikely it would happen in that case with the timing. So, okay. All right.
Let's see what happens to the numbers. Boom.
Oh man.
That was no longer clickbait. Now we're at 99.
We're back at 99. And again, what we did earlier was
just a cumulative jump.
The cumulative is now at 81,000.
And so this is starting at 1%. This is an illustration of what I mentioned earlier called the washing out of the priors.
Yeah.
All right, let's do one more.
All right, last one. Another cool one. So this is the most recent one. This one happened in 2023. So can we see? Yes, we can. All right. James Drain had multiple sclerosis for a while, a younger guy. So he also worked with chemicals. I think it was Mylenol or something like that. I forget what it was. But basically the chemical exposure from the gases to his myelin sheath, which was already damaged by the MS, caused him to have significant vision issues. So in his left eye, he had a scotoma, which is where you have this big black surface thing that blocks your vision. And it kept expanding to where he was almost completely blind in that eye. And the right eye, he had kaleidoscope vision, where it looks almost like it's a cracked mirror. So he became significantly disabled. He had to have a cane to walk. He lost his driver's license. He was legally blind. I think his visual acuity would have been something around 20 or over 100, something like that. So if you want one of his optic things here, I won't go into the details of this, but this just shows that, especially on the left eye, his retina was extremely thinned out, which is common with MS because it gets rid of the nerve sheath that blocks that. So that caused significant damage. And this is also irreversible. It's something that happens physically to the actual optic nerve into the eye. It's not something that's like psychological that just goes away easily. So he, I believe, began to develop this in 2015. By 2018, 2019 is when he had severe vision problems and was basically disabled at that point. So he has this for a while. And in 2023, he decides to get baptized. And this one's pretty cool because this one's actually on camera. At the moment he gets baptized, if this is going to bring it up here. I don't know.
What?
Yeah, so he says in here, baptismal. I don't know how good the audio is. So he looks and he starts to notice that he can see the back of the stage. And you'll see here in a second, he looks over to his pastor. Yeah, this is the moment where he's like, wait a minute, my eyesight.
Hey, we can't hear the audio. We can't hear the audio. Can you mute the audio?
It's just
because it's like, oh, okay. It's interfering with your microphone.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, just mute the audio up at the top right.
Oh, just like close the audio out? Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, just mute the audio. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I didn't want the music interfering with that. Sorry about that. So anyway, he's talking to his pastor right now, like, hey, I think I can see. So this is why this is the awkward exchange at the baptismal that he's looking. And so that's pretty cool. So he goes back to his neurologist, and when they redo his eyesight, he's at 20/25 now, which is almost perfect. And he didn't even have that prior to him getting MS. His eyesight wasn't that good even before then. So it was definitely an improvement. So that one I think is particularly cool because it's on video, and it happened literally right when he came out of the baptism water. So I like to think that one's pretty cool under Christianity.
What the heck?
Christian context, you know? So
what the heck? Why isn't this on like CNN and stuff, man?
You tell me. That's a great question. And Fan, this is another one that GMRI has looked into.
Sociological question.
Yeah. Yeah. The GMRI hasn't done a
what you're asking is one of the biggest like hurdles when it comes to talking about miracles in general is that exact question. So many people do like this sociology stuff and all these other things, and they'll be like, well, why isn't this like attested by all these like medical professionals and all this other stuff? Caleb, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I have a whole chapter on that, or at least I'll have a paper on it on terms of why they don't show up in medical journals. There's a lot of reasons. That
What's his name again? I'm going to Google this.
James Drain.
Yeah, I think if you look up James Drain blind, this was actually primarily on a documentary that was on a. I'll send you the link to it later, Trent. But yeah, this was looked into by some of the people who look into some of this stuff who are medical professionals, and that's where I got the images of his records and stuff like that. So with GMRI. So all right, probabilities.
Probabilities. Should we go again, like maybe 15% because it happened during a baptism?
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's like very Christian specific, you know.
What do you think, Trent? 15% sound good?
I mean, at least I'm trying to. Once again, I'm shook by this. I mean, I feel like this one's super high. I am going to have to read that chapter you just mentioned, Caleb, because it really bugs me that like I'm looking for this and it's like all Facebook and Instagram.
Right. Yeah,
like,
that's where
no, but there is not there. At least when I go to news.google.com, not a single mention. Like not even one.
I'll send you the docu-series where they talk about that particular one. I have I'll send you I have a chapter on just generally like why are these not talked about more in medical journals and stuff like that. But we can get to that later. I know Cam's wanting to wrap up here, but we can definitely.
Yeah, I want to wrap up for Trent. We have a couple super chats to get through as well, so we'll.
I'm not going to fight you guys on this one.
All right, so the probability, let's say. Again,
it's
another 1%.
Right at the time of baptism, right? I think the timing is like what's like especially like kind of unlikely, right?
Yeah, let's do 0.1%.
Okay. Yeah.
And see what happens. Whoa, this is gonna be nuts. Ooh, okay.
Oh my God.
It broke the software.
Look at that phase factor jump, dude.
You just broke. And
I
again,
broke the
remember
software. Now it just says 99 plus.
And this is starting at 1. This is 1% for our priors, right? For Christianity.
Yeah. Let's see what it would take to actually lower it down. Let's go back to.
I was going to ask, like,
the priors.
What would it have looked like? I don't know if your program will let you do this, but like, if we were to have the priors set to like 1 in 200 billion, even.
Oh, I can't do that. It's too
much. Just put like.
So even at 0.1% for Christianity being true, it's still 99.99.
1/10 of 1% is the prior now.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're still at 99.99%.
That's crazy.
And this is after 7 pieces of evidence. This is after only 7 pieces of out of. No, not out of 500. That's just the Catholic canonization miracles.
Right. From the 1900s, if we're going...
From the 1900s.
They include the 72 words miracles either, if we want to.
Yeah, that's crazy, man.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. As much as I love... I'm sorry, go ahead, Cameron.
No. Go ahead, Caleb.
No, I just was going to say, I don't know if Trent feels the same way, but like, philosophical arguments are great and all, but I think some just looking at stuff like that where it's clear cut, that to me is just like more dumbfounding than like, oh, there's this really hard argument I can't think of. It's like all of my theodicy considerations just kind of go out the window when I see something like that. Where it's like, okay, but like, how on earth do you explain that? You know, so.
All right, this super chat says, props to Than and Trent for converting me to the cult of Bayes.
One of us. One of us.
All right, modern atheism says, why does Christianity get a 15% prior when there are thousands of possible religions? Shouldn't the prior divide it equally among all religions?
Possible religions. A possible religion is the same as a non-religion. and if he's suggesting there are 15,000 actual religions, well, not all religions are created equally. There's a lot more credibility to Islam than there is like Sikhism. There's a lot more credibility to, Hinduism than there is Mormonism. So they're not all created equally. And at some point, they dwindle to the point of irrelevance. So.
And we did lower it to 1%, by the way. I know he probably sent this way early.
No, 0.1%. We lowered it to 0.1%.
It was still at 99.
Yeah, he said how many thousands did he say there are?
He said that he just says thousands of possible religions. He was talking about the 15% of that we initially set for our prior.
Oh,
that's
got
where
it.
that 15 is coming from.
That print. Got it. Yeah, so if it's thousands, you set it to 1 in 1,000, right?
Yeah, I set it to 1 in 1,000.
Yeah, there you go. It didn't make a damn bit of difference.
Yeah.
I'm scooping that one. I'm brushing that one on over.
All right, next one. Christian Theologetics says you should probably respond to the following: Hume's argument against miracles, and all you have are claims, and claims aren't evidence.
We have our epistemologist here.
I think this is somebody trolling. I think this is probably one of our mutual friends just trying to troll us.
That's probably right. Let me make this a bit bigger so we can all read it.
I think I might even know who that is. Just literally trying to get me to flip off a camera. There's thousands of people out there that are just trying to get me to flip off the camera tonight.
So what is Hume's argument against miracles? Why don't you say a bit about that, Trent? What is your take on Hume's argument?
Yeah, so I mean, part of what he says in his chapter of miracles he writes this in the Treatise of Human Nature, and then his Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, is that miracle claims by their very nature are going to be, really, really exceptional events, and that and so the evidence is going to be massively stacked against them by nature. Well, Bayes literally answered him before he even read that, and there's a great book by a not religious guy, John Ehrman, called Hume's Abject Failure, that talks about how bad Hume's reasoning is. And if you read C.S. Lewis in his book Miracles has a chapter that is a direct response to Hume, and it's awesome. It's excellent. I didn't expect that it would be, but it was great. So the Hume thing is just kind of really passé. You could get away with that in like 1921, but actual Hume scholarship and probabilistic scholarship relative to Humean type claims about religion are largely discredited. And then the claims thing is like, oh my God, all evidence consists in claims, to a certain respect. You go into a courtroom and you got this person claiming that person claiming the other, and the term claim has no normative content to it at all, not even a little bit. It's just a proposition. You can say assertion. A claim is just another name for an assertion, and assertions assert propositions, and propositions are the contents of evidence. So this is very, 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 very bad comment.
Well, he has a little.
I'm going to rate the
face.
I'm going to rate the comments. I'm giving this one a 1.5.
I think he has a little winky face at the end.
Comments now. Oh, is it really? Okay, I told you I thought it was somebody just punking us.
Yeah. All right. Smooth Scripture says, what do you guys think of the New Truth Scriptures Bible? I have no idea what they're talking about.
Never heard of it. Never heard of it.
Yeah.
Sorry. Send me one. I'll tell you.
All right. A Christian worldview can also take into account demonic activity, demonic revelations from other religions, demonic possession, exorcism, thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah. No, so when I said that,
I'll go. That was actually one of the pieces of evidence that I was going to include was some of the testimony from exorcists, but we sort of just ran out of time. There was a bunch of other things I wanted to talk about. Padre Pio would have been fun to discuss. The stigmata, the odor of sanctity, the bilocations, there's some other factors, but the healing. Yes, correct. The healings. I was also going to discuss Fatima a bit, but yeah, we just sort of ran out of time, and we only looked at 7, but we were already like maxing out the software in terms of probabilities. So yeah, we could have discussed that, but we just didn't have time to.
Just another stream.
Okay.
Yeah, another stream.
They also spelled exorcism wrong. The H.
Well, so this is important. You know, about we ought to do a follow-up show where we evaluate the claims of other religions.
Trent, you sound like a robot. You're like, your connection is not clear right now. Trent, fix your Walmart internet.
It's not Walmart. He's using McDonald's Wi-Fi right now.
McDonald's Wi-Fi. There it is. Okay, he's back. Trent, it's not your camera. It's your internet.
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
Yeah, your internet is terrible.
That's well, I mean, all of a sudden.
Yeah, all of a sudden. No, that's the last super chat. That was the last one. Yeah, no, this was a fun stream. I think very instructive for people, right? Just in 7 lines of evidence, we arrived at a conclusion that Christianity is 99.9999% probable. Let me pull it up again just to remind the audience. This is where we're at. You know, at a 0.1% chance that Christianity is true. 0.99994. A Bayes factor of what is that? 16,200,000.
And this was us being very generous with some of the naturalistic theories, by the way, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
In some cases, yeah. So,
yeah,
that's
so I
cool.
think we're expecting a lot of, cope responses.
Yeah, everyone's going to be converted.
You're just
You're not going to get any
biased.
responses.
Yeah, no, this was a lot of fun. In seriousness, what did you guys? Any thoughts before we close out?
I just personally love this topic. Like, I've been waiting for Caleb to be ready to publish his book for a really long time, because I've been wanting to push the argument for miracles for a really long time. So I'm just excited to be here.
We're going on 5 years in terms of how long this is. I'm hoping the manuscript's close to done.
Yeah, I know. I gave up on waiting on you, Caleb.
Get her done, bro. Get her done.
I try. Hey, I do this on the side, so I don't do this for a living. So unfortunately, I don't have.
If you want comments, if you want comments on any sort of methodological chapters, send them to me. I'll give you comments.
I love that. I also expect a blurb saying this is the best book on theism ever written too. So I would love an endorsement. We got to get to that.
All right, guys, it's been a lot of fun. Let me know what you all think in the comments. Don't forget that you can go download this software right now and play around with the numbers yourself and see what you come up with. That is linked on our Patreon. I've got it linked in the description of the video. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you